G'day everyone, I'm Tom Tanuki, Chief War Correspondent from the front lines of Australia's anti-Semitism crisis, reporting live and in person. Like Sky News Australia, I am now hosting an official Australian Anti-Semitism Summit, and this is the keynote speech. Everybody give a big round of applause, stadium vibes, lighting effects, sense of import and gravitas, etc., etc. As Australia's chief anti-Semitism crisis correspondent, I've had much to cover with the astronomical rise in homegrown anti-Semitism since 2023, a phenomenon which can be blamed solely on the cruelty of man towards his fellow mankind. Oh, also, it can be blamed on radical far-left extremists. Extremists such as those among my audience who I take absolutely no pleasure at all in crafting regular videos for. If you ask me, you should all be jailed indefinitely. Many people say I'm like Drew Pavlo, like a white martyr figure who's willing to lose it all to battle the rise in anti-Semitism, except probably a little bit more credible because I don't live with my mother. Who do martyrs like us, white martyr figures like us, put our faith in? Who else is there when, so many politicians have allowed these fucking university students to get out there and cry about child massacres in public without being jailed without trial for at least 2 years? Every day they walked free on those encampments was another day of unfettered, pure anti-Semitism. Since 2023, I couldn't even make a WhatsApp chat group to harass and dox anti-Zionists without having to worry about them doing that back to me, without being unable to expect their immediate criminal prosecution. It took 4 whole days to get the Prime Minister of this country to follow my and Alex Rivchin's orders and propose authoritarian anti-doxing laws. And those 4 days, I might add, were basically a pogrom. My enemies should be jailed for doing the stuff I do. And if it doesn't happen, well, that's the very definition of anti-Semitism, as per this special dictionary that I had made. This is the anti-Semitism election. That's the main issue on the table this time round. If you understand, like I do, that Israel is Australia's best friend. Israel is also the US's best friend, and the UK's best friend, and, Germany's best friend. They have a lot of best friends, a lot of friendship rings. But who in Australia is their best friend since the genocide began in the wake of October the 7th, 2023? Is it Labor or Liberal? That's the topic of the keynote of my Anti-Semitism Summit. As part 1, I want to weigh up on who is the best friend of our best friend Israel this election, so we can know who to vote for accordingly. First of all, let's look at the Liberal Party. Imagine you were chained up to a dungeon and starved for days on end, and that torturer dangles a chip in front of your head, just a little too far away for you to get to. You can picture the way after days of starving you'd strain and stretch at the neck, veins bulging out, just to try and get at the chip. That's the torture. Well, in Peter Dutton's case, that chip is Israel's cock and balls. And the only chains on Dutton are his not being the Prime Minister in power to be able to break out and gobble up Netanyahu whole. The problem here for Dutton is that the Liberals haven't been in power since the entirety of, Israel's genocide. So for everything that Labor has been able to do to express their ultimate friendship with Israel, with our best friend since 2023, the Libs have only been able to match with rhetoric alone. Dutton has duly promised anything and everything to placate even the most rabid Zionist. He's done his best. Mandatory minimum jail sentences for breathing but a word of anti-Zionism. That's great. Banning all students from having opinions. Deportation for anyone who doesn't enjoy and get off on daily Arab massacres. Dutton will say anything to stand out. But unfortunately, his friendship has been the friendship of words alone. And it's actions we need, not words. So let's go over to the Labor Party. Well, look, I did intend to look at post October the 7th, 2023 acts of friendship, but I think it's worth it to point out that Labor has historical form on being friends with Israel. Australia was the first country to vote in the UN in favour of carving up Palestinian land to give to these occupiers when they were staging their US-backed invasion in the 1940s. And then Australia was the first state to recognise Israel as not an illegal occupation, but as a state. And that happened under a Labor government. So, Israel remembers this and it thanks you, Labor. Labor once basically helped usher along an internal coup to replace someone who wasn't being a best friend to Israel with a best friend of Israel. This is if you believe the word of former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, who shared in his memoir once that Zionist lobbyist Mark Liebler was very angry that Kevin was publicly castigating Israel for having given an assassin a fake Australian passport to murder a Hamas member in Dubai. Now, Rudd never said that Liebler plotted his demise. He never said that outright. But he did say, he did recount an anecdote that Liebler once threatened him in a private meeting, that if he didn't shape up, then Gillard would do well as a replacement for him. Next minute, Gillard was his replacement. And Julia has always duly foamed at the mouth for Israel. So thank you to Labor for always curating your leadership on this important matter. Penny Wong said after October the 7th, "We stand with Israel and we always will." That was the quote. Now, I understand that because I stand with my real-life best friend, who I won't name here because if I did, I would be charged under anti-doxing laws for doing so. But you get the idea. Yeah, I have a best mate, and I stand with them. But to be honest, if my best mate went out tomorrow and killed a record amount of kids, I probably wouldn't stand with them anymore. But this is where Wong and Albanese have more intestinal fortitude than me, because no amount of dead civilians have inspired Wong or Albanese to take their friendship rings off, and that's actually beautiful. Right after October the 7th, 2023, New South Wales Labor Premier Chris Minns got out there, straight up solidarity right off the bat, lit up the Sydney Opera House with the colours of Israel's flag. Now, that's a very nice gesture, but he did then let an anti-Zionist protest happen under those Opera House lights without immediately imprisoning everyone who attended. So, Chris, I want you to know that friendship isn't all light shows, mate. Sometimes you need to back up your lights. Israel's breaking international laws every day to do what it wants to do. You need to consider doing the same. Importantly, Labor courageously held out in the UN for well over a year of unmitigated genocide before splitting with the US in the end and finally voting with 156 other countries to demand the end of Israel's presence in occupied Palestine. Even the International Court of Justice's ruling that Israel was plausibly committing genocide wasn't enough for Labor, which is obviously good friendship, but there's a real substance to the way that Australia backs up our best mate, where it really counts, beyond the show of UN votes. We provision parts for F-35 jet fighters that annihilate Gazan families, schools and hospitals every day. Labor has allowed this to continue for every day of the genocide in the spirit of true friendship. And you know what? Anthony Albanese on the campaign trail has even proudly looked in a camera and lied through his fucking teeth to keep those arms sales protected and ignored. And that is what you do for a mate.
Will your government move to prevent the sale of any lethal EOS product to Israel?
We do not sell arms to Israel.
But you sold parts that had been...
We do not sell arms to Israel.
I think, though, that Labor's strongest act of friendship towards Israel has been in its anti-democratic dismantling of protest rights domestically to help stall the groundswell of anti-Zionist, anti-genocide activism in this country at the behest of Zionist lobbyists. To placate people like Alex Rivchin, Mark Liebler, and myself as Australia's chief anti-Semitism crisis correspondent, Albanese has pulled out all the stops to kill off activism in Australia. That's what you do for your friends like Alex Rivchin, who once boasted that he, earlier in the genocide, had daily contact with Albanese's office. Labor brought in anti-doxing laws, I mentioned them earlier, that helped to stifle free expression, anti-fascism, independent journalism. They've brought in mandatory minimum jail sentences for flying bad terrorist flags. They've banned people from rallying near places of worship for any reason at all, even if they just happen to be rallying near a place of worship, even if those places of worship are holding fascist political meetings inside them. And they fostered a repressive witch hunt climate for anti-Zionists who, for the most part, simply cannot abide seeing a daily highlight reel of dead Palestinian families. Even when we find out that some of the incidents that led to many of these laws turn out to be hoaxes and scams by organised criminals, they refuse to back down and repeal their own anti-democratic laws. Now, after a bloodbath of nearly 2 years in duration, there's so many local outrages that I could focus on for Liberal and Labor, but this one really has it all. So in part 2 of my anti-Semitism election summit, which will come in the week before the election, we're going to focus on that one particular string of hoaxes and attendant words and decisions by Liberal and Labor. Sadly, even all this effort isn't enough for Netanyahu. In December 2024, he described Labor as having an extreme anti-Israel position. This is because Netanyahu is a man that has gotten very used to expecting a little more VIP service from his Western allies. And so he should. He is our bestie after all. So, in conclusion, we've had nearly 2 years of genocide now, and throughout that we've experienced endless Labor action and endless Liberal words to prop up what Israel have been doing, because they are our best friends in the world, and we'll never have better ones. As a result of all this, I think from the left there is very, very little faith left in due process and the machinery of global justice and so on. Many people on the left are seen to be unspeakably bleak about their outlook on the world as a result of watching Western power align so publicly and uniformly behind a genocide. And those people lack any more hope in the prospects of global justice to net any material or moral wins for those poor fucking people in Gaza. This was the case for many people who were a bit anti-electoralism on the left previously, but I think that pool has seemed to be widened significantly after all this injustice, all this complicity. And everyone knows this. And they're all terrified here that the left votes that fuck off from Labor will deliver a balance of power to parties like the Greens or Victorian Socialists or like any of the other small smattering of parties who vocally sang out against the genocide. Is there any other? Advance Australia put like at least $10 million into specifically denying that possibility. Clive Palmer was shit scared enough to start chucking in his wasted millions yet again. And Labor and Liberal have been tiptoeing towards the election date with this palpable fear on their faces. Not to erase the domestic importance of the many other issues that we're facing ahead of this election, but the fact is that for anyone who has an ounce of conscience left about all those dead people and our national complicity in that, there can be no voting for either of those parties. And we aren't like America. The prospect of a balance of power here is tantalising for anyone on the left who sees that they might be able to deliver a mandate to a party with a balance of power who do give a fuck about the genocide. This is why the mainstream power in Australia has aligned to try and fuck over the Greens and other left parties who care. They have allowed people to die by the tens of thousands, as we will all eventually discover, I'm sure, the hundreds of thousands. They have allowed an army of children to be massacred, and they have done so with vociferous approval and unmitigated cheerleading. Labor and Liberal, Israel thanks you both so much for your friendship, and they only have one small request, that you cup the balls while you're doing it. See you next time for part 2 of my official Australian Election Antisemitism Summit.